It always begins the same way, a phone ringing in the dead silence of night. No caller ID, no warning, just the sound that slices through sleep like a razor. You fumble in the dark, eyes half closed, heart not yet awake, and you answer. The line is dead. For a moment you think it's nothing, just a glitch. But then the static hits, a slow crackle, like something trying to breathe through the wires. And then you hear it. A voice that doesn't sound alive, grainy, like a broken radio underwater. A voice that doesn't ask your name because it already knows. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't scream. It simply tells you the date and the exact time your life will end. Most hang up in disbelief. Some laugh. Some call the police. And every single one of them. Every man who ever heard that whisper never lived past the moment they were told. I'm not here to frighten you with ghost stories. Those are for children. What I'm about to tell you is not myth. It is not folklore. It is a signal buried deep inside the machinery of our world. These calls have been documented for more than a century. Long before telephones even existed, men received letters in strange handwriting with the same message. Ancient sailors heard it as a voice carried on the wind. And long before that, kings and priests spoke of messengers who arrived in the night, naming the hour when blood would spill. Nothing in this world happens by chance. Death does not arrive randomly. It is scheduled. It is planned. And someone, or something, has always been keeping the calendar. The real question isn't how they know when you will die. The real question is why they want you to know. By the time you finish this video, you will never look at your phone the same way again. You will feel the hum of unseen wires around you. You will notice eyes where no eyes should be, and you will start to wonder if the next ring in the Niger, it is for you. And so we begin here, with a case buried for over 100 years, locked in a police archive never meant to see daylight, a case so precise, so cold, that even hardened detectives burned their notes when it was over. One man, one phone call, and a death that arrived on schedule to the second. It happened in Chicago, winter of 1973, a city drowning in snow and cigarette smoke, a night so cold the payphones froze in their booths. And yet one man's office phone rang at exactly midnight, even though no one was there to call. His name was Richard Lang, mid-level insurance investigator, not the kind of man who draws attention. He lived alone, worked late, had no enemies, no secrets worth killing for. At least, that's what people thought. But when he told police what he'd heard, they stopped taking notes and started staring at the floor. Lang said the voice on the line was thin, brittle, like a broken wire humming underwater. It told him he would die at 4:13 p.m. 3 days later. No threat, no reason, just the time, down to the minute. He tried to laugh it off, but his secretary said he couldn't sit still. He smoked through 3 packs a day, waiting for that hour to arrive, pacing his office like an animal in a cage, jumping every time the phone rang again. And when the clock struck 4:13 on that third afternoon, Richard Lang collapsed in front of his typewriter. No struggle, no wounds, no signs of poison. His heart simply stopped, as if obeying orders. The police called it a natural death, but one detective didn't believe it. His name was Michael Croft, and he spent weeks trying to trace that midnight call. He expected to find some prankster, some enemy with a twisted sense of humor, but what he found made him burn his own report before it ever reached the chief's desk, because the number didn't belong to a stranger. It didn't belong to a machine. It didn't belong to anyone at all. When they ran the trace, it came back to Richard Lang's own office line, a line that had been permanently disconnected 3 years earlier. Think about that for a moment. A dead phone ringing from itself, a man warned by his own voice or something using it, and a death that arrived lower. Like a train on schedule, not 1 second late, not 1 second early. The department sealed the case, filed it as unsolved, and told the press it was nothing, just a heart attack. But Michael Croft knew better. He told his partner one thing before disappearing off the grid. We didn't find the caller. We found the calendar. Richard Lang's death should have been the end of it, a strange story for detectives to tell each other over whiskey. But it wasn't, because 3 months later another call came, this time to a steelworker in Pittsburgh, and then to a trucker in Texas, and then to a banker in New York. Always the same. Midnight ring, broken radio voice, exact time of death, always correct. There were no exceptions, no survivors, no way to cheat the clock. One man tried to flee across the country, smashing his phone, cutting every wire in his house. But at the appointed hour his body simply failed, as if the call had been written into his blood. The cases never made headlines. The obituaries called them aneurysms, accidents, unexplained collapses. But a few men inside the system started connecting dots. Coroners who saw the same look on the faces of the dead, a kind of frozen recognition, like they knew what was coming and didn't bother to fight. Investigators who noticed the static, always the static, left humming in the receiver after each call. A sound like a heartbeat trapped inside an electric storm. They started to see a rhythm, a cadence, almost like someone, or something, was working down a list, not killing at random, but clearing appointments. These weren't warnings. They were executions, with RSVP notices, delivered in advance just to watch you squirm. One federal agent, whose name never appeared on any official file, began tracking the calls on his own time, plotting them on a wall map, date by date, time by time, until he noticed something chilling. Each death lined up perfectly with the next, as if the world itself was keeping tempo, a ticking clock buried in the wires, a pulse older than the telephone, older than electricity itself. And when he brought his findings to a superior, he was told to shut it down, to destroy every note, every photograph, every taped recording. Gee of that drowning voice, because if the public ever realized what these calls meant, panic wouldn't just break out. Civilization itself would fracture. But before he disappeared, the agent managed to leave one single message scrawled on the back of a burned file folder, a warning meant for anyone who found it later. 4 words that no one has ever been able to explain. No exceptions, no survivors. The cases were strange enough when the voice belonged to no one, when it was just a cracked whisper leaking through the wires like water through rusted pipes. But then came the ones where the caller wasn't a stranger at all. It started with a lawyer in Phoenix, a man named Daniel Hurst, sharp, disciplined, not prone to fantasy. He answered the phone at exactly midnight, half asleep, expecting some drunk client in trouble. But what he heard stopped his breath cold, because it wasn't just a voice. It was his voice, faint, distorted, like it was bleeding through a broken radio. But it carried the same rasp, the same cadence, only older, like he was listening to himself 20 years in the future. The message was simple. The time was exact. 11:29 a.m. 2 days away. No explanation, no threat. Just the clockwork certainty of doom. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was a trick, maybe a recording, maybe someone using voice modulation. But when he played the call back on his answering machine, the static had eaten it alive. Only fragments remained, a drowned heartbeat under the hiss. Hurst spent those 2 days locked in his apartment, blinds drawn, gun on the table, phone ripped out of the wall. But when 11:29 arrived, he never touched the trigger. His body just gave up. No poison, no forced entry, just a man dropping dead at the second he'd been told to, as if something inside him obeyed an order he couldn't even hear consciously. And it wasn't just him. Other men reported the same horror, voices that were unmistakably their own, sometimes younger, sometimes older, always warped with static, like an echo from a well that had no bottom. One construction foreman even swore his caller laughed at him, the exact same laugh he heard in the mirror every morning when he joked with himself shaving, like some version of him had already crossed to the other side and was Carly. Going back to confirm the reservation, detectives tried to investigate voice-matching angles. They brought in specialists, but the recordings never held up. The static wasn't just noise, it was alive, moving, almost breathing, Like the line itself didn't want to be traced, and every lead died with the next body on the list. One coroner, after examining 3 of these cases, said something that chilled everyone in the room. If these men weren't murdered, then they were summoned by a voice that belonged to them, but carried the weight of years they hadn't lived yet. A voice that knew how it would end, because it had already been there. The last case like this left a single detail that no one could explain. The voice on the line was their own, but older. The calls might have stayed urban legend if not for one thing. They started landing on the wrong ears. Men in positions of power, men who weren't supposed to die without warning. Senators, consultants, private contractors with security clearances so deep their names didn't show up on payroll. And when those men started dropping at the exact second predicted, the government stopped laughing. A file was assembled quietly, not under any official agency, not under any name you'd recognize, just a thin grey folder passed hand to hand, marked only with a single word: chorus, because the calls weren't isolated. They were part of a single song, a rhythm only a few could hear. Inside were photographs of dead men slumped over polished desks, cassette tapes filled with static, and that same submerged whisper, lab reports proving the calls didn't come from any traceable line, and diagrams showing dates mapped in a perfect spiral, like someone winding a clock that ticked in human lives. Agents listened to the recordings on reel-to-reel machines, headphones pressed tight, trying to pull words out of the static. But the waveforms weren't like normal speech. They pulsed like heartbeat patterns, carrying information deeper than sound, the kind you feel in your teeth before you hear it in your ears. And one by one those analysts went pale, slid their headphones off, and refused to play them again. The file never made it into official archives. It was too dangerous. But men who touched it said the same thing. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't supernatural. It was systematic, cold, deliberate, and whoever or whatever was behind it wasn't trying to frighten people into changing their fates. They were arranging them like appointments in a ledger. One page in that folder contained a list of names with dates next to them, and every date was crossed off in red, except one at the bottom. A name. He circled instead of crossed, and when they tried to warn that man, to hide him, to relocate him, he died anyway. Not a second early or late, as if the warning itself meant nothing at all. The analyst who compiled the file scribbled his last note across the cover before he vanished. These weren't warnings, he wrote, they were scheduled terminations. Men who heard the voice said it wasn't just telling them when they'd die. It knew things. Things no one else should know. Not just passwords and bank accounts. Those can be hacked. I mean childhood fears, forgotten sins, the memory of something you stole when you were 10 and swore you'd never speak of. It doesn't whisper your secrets. It breathes them back at you. One corporate executive who received the call said the voice listed every lie he'd ever told his wife, in order, with dates, times, and even the smell of the room when he said them. He died on schedule, the exact second promised. A soldier in Kandahar reported his call, mentioned a farmhouse no one else knew about, where he'd buried something he wasn't proud of. He ripped out his SIM card, burned it, smashed his phone with a rock. But at the appointed hour, miles from any signal, his heart simply stopped beating. This isn't surveillance in the way you understand it. This isn't data mining or spyware. It's older, deeper, like something rooted in the current itself, in the invisible pulse running through every wire, every tower, every pocket in the world. Audio specialists tried to decode the signal. They said the static isn't random, it's layered, like breathing underwater. When they slowed it down, they swore they could hear another sound beneath it. Not words, but something like teeth grinding on stone. And the voice doesn't ask. It doesn't warn. It tells. The men who receive it always describe the same sensation. As it speaks, you don't feel afraid first. You feel exposed. Stripped naked, not physically, but psychically. Like someone has crawled through the floor of your mind and now knows every weak beam, every cracked nail holding you together. One man recorded his call and played it back in a soundproof lab. Halfway through, the speakers caught fire. Not overheated, ignited. He saw. The message didn't sound alive. It was alive. And when the technicians asked what exactly the voice told him, he refused to repeat it. His last words before his heart ruptured. It knew me. All of me. Every expert who studied these cases agrees on one thing. The caller doesn't just know your future. It knows who you really are. And it speaks with the authority of something that has always known. People ask the same question over and over. If something, or someone, has the power to decide when you die, why bother to call? Why give you notice at all? Is it mercy? Is it some twisted courtesy to let you make peace with your own clock? No, it isn't mercy. It's indoctrination. Think about it. If they wanted you simply erased, they could do it without a word. But the call forces you to live inside your own execution in advance. It makes you carry the weight of the countdown, hour by hour, breath by breath, until the very thing you fear becomes inevitable. Psychologists studying survivors, the few who claim to have beaten the call, if you can believe them, describe the same pattern. The voice doesn't just predict your death. It conditions you to accept it. It bends your mind to meet the appointed second. A man named Richard Lane got his call 2 weeks before his death date. He spent those days in terror, barricaded in his home, guns loaded, friends posted at every door. But by the final hour, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was calm, peaceful, like someone walking into a church before the service begins. He poured himself a drink. He even dressed in his best suit. At 8:44 p.m., the exact time he'd been told, he sat down in his favorite chair, smiled faintly, and died. No struggle. No intrusion. Just quiet surrender. Neurologists reviewed his autopsy. The cause wasn't a bullet, wasn't poison, wasn't stress. His brain had simply switched off, as though a circuit breaker had flipped inside his skull. Whatever is behind these calls doesn't want your fear at the end. It wants your obedience. The voice doesn't just predict death, it engineers consent for it. By the time the moment comes, most men are ready, even willing, to step through the door. One analyst put it best after reviewing 50 cases. The call isn't a warning, it's a rehearsal. And every rehind, RSAL has a purpose. Every conditioning program has a reason. So ask yourself, who benefits when men stop fighting to live? Who profits when you surrender before the first blow ever lands? These calls aren't telling you the time of your death, they're training you to meet it. At first people thought the calls came to anyone, unlucky teenagers, night shift workers, old men in nursing homes. But when researchers finally lined up the cases side by side, they saw something no one wanted to admit. The calls don't hit at random. They follow a pattern. The first clue came from a mathematician who charted 57 confirmed deaths. The names didn't spread evenly across age, income, or geography. They clustered. Executives, engineers, soldiers with classified assignments, judges with sealed cases, men who carried keys, literal or metaphorical, to systems they weren't supposed to open. Another analyst mapped the calls against world events. Every time one of these high-value targets died, something subtle shifted. A vote tipped the other way, a contract fell through, a shipment vanished at sea. The ripple wasn't obvious unless you looked closely. But someone was looking closely. Even the few civilian cases weren't truly random. A janitor who cleaned a defense contractor's office, a taxi driver who drove a witness home from a closed hearing, people with proximity to power, too near the flame, too curious to look away. The static itself carries clues. Digital forensics experts claim the background hum in these calls isn't simple interference. It's layered with a faint ticking, like a watch buried under dirt. Some believe that tick marks out why you've been chosen, not just when, as if the voice is measuring you before it removes you. The real nightmare is this. No call has ever gone to someone who didn't, in some way, matter. Whether you're a name on a sensitive file or just a pawn near someone else's game, if you get the call, you've been flagged, identified, selected. And that means there's intent behind it. Someone, or something, is choosing who lives long enough to move the pieces, and who gets cleared off the board. You aren't dying by accident. You're being erased on purpose. The deeper question isn't how the calls happen, it's why you. And if there's a list, who's writing the names? Because once you accept that these calls aren't random, you have to face something colder, darker, and infinitely worse than fate. Someone is choosing, and it's not random. You think phone calls foretelling death are new, a product of satellites and cell towers? No, the medium is new. The message is older than civilization. In Egypt, priests once spoke of Baal messengers, spirits that carried warnings to marked men in the night. Records in the Book of the Dead describe whispers outside a warrior's tent, giving him the exact hour he would fall in battle. And when the time came, his heart stopped before the arrow struck. In the frozen north, Viking sagas tell of Draugr, walking corpses that didn't just haunt battlefields, but announced death in advance. Men heard their own voices carried on the wind, calling from a future grave. The sagas don't call it magic, they call it inevitability. The Aztecs spoke of owl cries as omens, but the most feared sign was quieter, a voice in the darkness, speaking from nowhere, naming the day the sun would rise red for you and not set. Priests said it wasn't a curse, it was an invitation. Across continents, across centuries, these stories align. A warning that feels less like kindness and more like ownership. Not a chance to run, a mark of something already decided. Modern men dismiss these tales as myth, but the patterns repeat. The same static, the same sensation of drowning sound, the same chill when you realize the voice knows you better than you know yourself. Only now, instead of whispers through stone or wind, it comes through fiber optics and glass screens. Anthropologists studying these accounts noticed something disturbing. Ancient cultures treated the messenger with reverence, not fear. They didn't try to block the voice. They listened. They obeyed. And in every era, those who heard and fought it vanished faster. What if the calls are not technology at all? What if the signal rides technology, the way thunder rides air? What if this is the same messenger, wearing different masks, aching through whatever medium humanity builds for itself? We invented radios. The whispers came through radios. We invented telephones. The whispers came through telephones. Now we carry glass screens in our pockets, and the whispers have your number. Maybe this isn't a modern phenomenon. Maybe it's the oldest one of all. And if death itself has always phoned ahead, who or what has been on the other end of the line? Engineers analyzing these calls made an unsettling discovery. When you strip away the human words, when you isolate the raw transmission, what's left isn't voice at all. It's rhythm, pulse, something almost alive. A research lab at MIT ran the recordings through spectrum analysis. They expected to find garbled speech or synthetic tones. Instead, they found steady spikes. Not language, not even sound. A biological signature. The waveforms weren't speech, but heartbeat patterns. Each call carries a cadence matching the recipient's own pulse, slowed, distorted, then layered under the voice like a shadow. It's as if the call isn't coming to you. It's coming from you, reflected back by something that knows your body better than any doctor ever could. One technician described it like hearing his own heart underwater. "It wasn't words," he said. "It was me, talking to me, through the static." Even more disturbing, when the calls were played back to survivors, their heart rate changed in real time, syncing with the hidden beat. Some dropped into bradycardia, their pulse plummeting to fatal lows until the playback was stopped. The signal isn't just sound, it's control. Whatever's behind these calls doesn't just predict death. It can induce it, tuning the human body like a radio, switching it off like a machine. Government labs tried to jam the signal. The moment they blocked it, the wave shifted frequencies, leaping across networks, riding power lines, hiding inside the hiss of everyday static. Even when phones were off, the call came through. Even when the line was cut, the voice found another path. One physicist warned, "This isn't data in the way we understand data. It's more like a carrier wave, something ancient using modern tools." He was found dead 3 days later, the precise second predicted in his own call. If the voice is using your heartbeat as a template, then every ring is more than a warning. It's calibration, a test run, a rehearsal for the main event. So ask yourself, if your phone rings at midnight tonight, and you hear your own pulse in the static, will you hang up? Or will you listen to yourself die in advance? You'd think something like this would be impossible to hide. Thousands of unexplained deaths, phones ringing at impossible hours, calls from numbers that don't exist. But the telecom giants have been cleaning these records for years. When independent investigators subpoenaed call logs, they didn't just find gaps, they found surgical deletions. Entire sequences of network pings erased, replaced with dummy traffic, as if the call never happened. In some cases, the number shown on the victim's phone didn't appear in the carrier's database at all. A whistleblower from one major carrier described how engineers were ordered to black hole flagged incidents, wipe them from routing tables, and mark them as technical errors. These weren't low-level decisions. The instructions came from executive floors, behind locked glass doors, the kind you need 3 badges and a palm scan to enter. One leaked email contained a chilling phrase, "Let the event expire naturally." Naturally? These calls are anything but natural. And it's not just paperwork. Families who went public found themselves cut off, numbers disconnected overnight, accounts mysteriously closed. Some even claimed their phones began ringing with the same death call after speaking out. This isn't passive ignorance. This is active cooperation. The carriers know the calls are real. They've seen the untraceable numbers routing through towers that shouldn't exist. They've watched heart rates crash while people answer phantom rings. They've even tested it in secret labs, confirming that the signal can be reproduced, but never controlled. And still, they keep the towers humming. They keep the networks live. Why? Because stopping the calls would mean admitting they're happening. And admitting they're happening would raise a question no corporation wants to answer. Who has access to the system? One former security audie, Tor, said it best, "These companies aren't scared of the calls. They're scared of who's making them. If you think your carrier protects you, remember this. They could pull the plug tomorrow. They could shut down the path these signals take. But they don't. They scrub the evidence, bury the bodies in digital dirt, and send you your bill on time." They knew, and they let it ring. You might expect this phenomenon to haunt civilians alone. Isolated night owls, lonely travelers, the kind of people who die quietly. But the death calls have been traced into the heart of the military. Declassified fragments show at least 7 incidents on American bases where secure field radios, not commercial phones, but encrypted combat comms, rang with impossible transmissions. Soldiers in the middle of desert patrols swore they heard their own names whispered through channels that weren't active. In 2004, an armored unit in Kandahar received what they thought was an emergency redirect. The voice gave precise coordinates, a calm order, and a timestamp. But the order didn't come from any known command channel. When they rolled out, a roadside bomb was already waiting. The timestamp wasn't a deadline. It was the second they died. Higher-ups labeled it enemy interference. But the signals weren't Taliban, weren't Russian, weren't anything. Military analysts traced the call, only to find it had originated from inside the convoy itself. This isn't just a civilian phenomenon. The voice reaches into the most secure communications grids in the world, bypassing encryption, spoofing identities, predicting death down to the second. Whistleblowers from Fort Bragg claim entire training exercises have been scrubbed because of this. A recruit's radio crackles. He hears his own breathing on the other end, and 3 hours later, he drops from an aneurysm no scan could have predicted. Some officers privately call it the Reaper's frequency, and they say it's escalating. The more we digitize our weapons, our armor, our very soldiers, the more exposed we become to something that doesn't care about your rank, your clearance, or your uniform. The Pentagon denies everything, of course. They call it superstition, war stress, coincidence. But in confidential briefings, alls have demanded hard-proof countermeasures. They've even tested blocking the frequency with classified jammers, devices that never last more than one use. The calls don't just warn death, they deliver it. And when soldiers get the call, entire units vanish. For years, people believed no one could survive the call. But then there was Daniel Mercer. In 2011, Mercer, a cryptographer contracted by the NSA, claimed he received the midnight ring. He heard static first, then his own voice whispered the date and time of his death. The cadence was off, grainy, like a broken radio submerged in water. And then came the pulse. His own heartbeat, slowed to a funereal rhythm, echoing through the line. Mercer didn't wait for fate. He locked himself in an isolated cabin in Montana, cut the power, destroyed every phone, every modem. He went completely dark. For 3 months, no signal touched him. And yet, on the predicted night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the cabin phone he'd ripped out of the wall rang. He didn't answer. He says the ringing stopped after the 3rd chime. He believes that's what saved him. But when federal agents reached his cabin the next morning, they found the phone cord fused into the wood, as if it had melted through by some invisible heat. Mercer went public once, on an encrypted forum. His post was removed within hours. Friends who spoke to him later say he'd changed, more than paranoid, almost mechanical. He claimed the signal wasn't a curse, but an invitation. That if you refused it long enough, it stopped calling you, because you'd already been marked. In his final message he wrote, "You can outrun the clock, but only by becoming part of it." Days later, he disappeared. No one knows where Mercer went. Some insist he faked his death and lives off-grid. Others believe he was taken by the same people, or things, behind the signal. And then came the chilling rumor. After Mercer vanished, dozens of recipients reported a new voice on their calls. Not their own, not the static whisper. A calm, human voice, deep, deliberate, telling them when they'd die. Those who had known Mercer swore it was him. Some say he never beat it. He just became the caller. Most people think of the midnight ring as a warning, a cruel countdown. But the deeper you dig, the more you realize it's not telling you when you'll die. It's inviting you to step across. Researchers who mapped recipient behavior found something strange. Those who answered immediately and without hesitation didn't just die at the predicted moment. They died absent, their bodies found sitting upright, eyes wide, no struggle, no sign of fear. It was as if they were taken, gently. Those who ignored the call didn't live longer. They just died harder. Car accidents, sudden strokes, fires, violent ends that looked like chance but hit exactly on time. The call isn't a forecast. It's an appointment. Answer politely, and you walk out of your life. Refuse, and you're dragged out. There's an even stranger pattern. A few recipients reported feeling euphoric when they picked up, like stepping into warm water or returning to a childhood memory. One described it as recognizing a room I'd never been in but somehow belonged to. Whatever speaks through that static doesn't threaten. It welcomes. It breathes with you. It repeats secrets no one else could know, not whispering them, but exhaling them, as if your own soul is speaking back. And right before the line goes dead, some claim they hear footsteps, not on the call, but in the room with them. Government memos quietly refer to this as compliance conditioning. They believe the signal doesn't just kill, it trains obedience, testing how quickly people surrender to something unseen. The scariest part? In a few cases, the recipients answered and never died at all. They just disappeared. No remains, no trace. Phone records showing the call ended mid-breath. What happens if you pick up? Are you killed, taken, changed? No one who answered is around to explain. What happens if you refuse? You still meet your time, but hard hours. The message is clear. This isn't negotiation, it's recruitment. The moment you answer, you aren't here anymore. You won't find these cases in open police reports or public databases. The deeper you go, the more the evidence feels curated, erased in some places, over-detailed in others, like someone's building a narrative while hiding the truth. But there's a shadow layer, whispered about by retired intelligence officers. They call it the Black Archives. A sealed collection of reports stored in vaults beneath Langley, GCHQ, the Kremlin, and Beijing, all documenting the same impossible event. The cases span decades. The earliest I've seen mentioned is 1958, long before cell phones, long before satellites. A woman in Hamburg received a call on a rotary landline. A male voice told her, in perfect German, that she'd die at exactly 3:42 p.m. 3 days later. She did. The caller's number, a string of digits that didn't exist in the telephone exchange at the time. In 1976, the CIA intercepted strange transmissions during Operation Cyclone. Shortwave bursts containing nothing but a human heartbeat, sped up to 180 beats per minute, then slowing to 40 before a voice recited a name and date. When analysts ran voice print analysis, the results were classified. By 1993, the files were global. French intelligence, Israeli Mossad, Chinese MSS, all noting that the signal crosses every border, rides every infrastructure, jumps from copper to fiber to wireless with no loss of clarity. One European memo explicitly says, "This is not surveillance, this is selection." What's worse, governments don't seem to control it, they only observe. In one case, a Soviet colonel allegedly tried to jam the signal by cutting power to an entire district. The call still came through, to a deadline in a dead city. So they stopped trying to fight it. Instead, they started tracking it, cataloguing victims and looking for patterns, not to save anyone, but to predict when their own people were next. Whistleblowers claim each agency has its own Index Zero, a private list of high-value targets who've received the call. When someone important picks up the phone, a whole chain of quiet preparation begins. Funerals arranged, replacements chosen, assets moved into place. Every government has a file, but none will admit it. Beneath the government archives, there's a quieter layer. Not intelligence agencies, not militaries, corporations. Telecom giants know far more than they'll ever admit. Engineers who've worked inside the big names, the ones building your phones, running the towers, maintaining the backbone of the internet, describe something they call the company. Not a specific brand, but an invisible alliance of the biggest players. They meet off-record, off-site, under different names. They don't wear badges, but they all share one mission: to study the signal without ever letting the public know it exists. In the early 2000s, Technicians noticed phantom traffic. Calls routed through systems that had no record of origin or destination. These weren't hacks. They didn't even register as normal voice data. They came through as bursts of compressed noise, like a broken radio underwater. But every burst lined up with a real-world death. One former employee of a major smartphone manufacturer claims firmware updates contain ghost protocols, diagnostic tools never documented in any public release. These tools watch for anomalies in call patterns, watch, but never block. Another insider from a major US carrier said he once tracked a midnight ring to a server that didn't belong to any network. When he reported it, he was told to stop digging, not by his boss, but by someone from another company. Competitors, rivals, all playing on the same team. It's not about stopping the calls. It's about monitoring them, learning from them. Some believe the company is trying to decode the signal, to turn it from prophecy into product. Imagine a device that could predict death, or worse, schedule it. The hints are everywhere if you look closely. New phone lines, mysteriously reserved. Corporate patents on low-frequency data transmissions that never make it to market. Quiet buyouts of Star. TUPs working on voice modulation or heartbeat biometrics. The scariest part? When whistleblowers talk, they don't last long. Not because of government assassins, but because their own companies erase them. No scandal, no trial. Just gone. The company isn't chasing profit. It's chasing control. If the call is inevitable, can it be stopped? One man thought so, and he paid for that belief with more than his life. In 2011, Dr. Marcus Vey, an electrical engineer turned paranoid recluse, claimed he'd built a device to jam the death frequency. He wasn't some crank in a basement. He'd worked on military communication satellites. He knew how to disrupt signals most people can't even detect. He called it a null cage, a handheld emitter wrapped in conductive shielding, tuned to create a dead zone where no cellular, Wi-Fi, or radio signal could penetrate. According to Vey, he tested it successfully on his own devices. No calls, no texts, no GPS. He thought he'd beaten the system. Then came his night. Neighbors reported hearing his phone ringing over and over, but when they checked, his house had no power, no lights, no sound but that endless tone, muffled, like it was coming from beneath the floorboards. When investigators arrived the next morning, the house smelled like burned wires, and something worse, copper mixed with blood. They found Vey slumped in a chair, the null cage still clutched in his hand. The device wasn't broken. It was warped, like it had been crushed inward from pressure that didn't come from this world. His skull told the same story. Not an explosion outward, not a fall, not trauma from outside. Forensic imaging showed hairline fractures radiating from the inside out. The official report listed aneurysm as the cause of death, but those who saw the scene knew better. His brain had been cooked alive. Afterward, his schematics vanished, his website wiped. His family claimed they never heard of any device. Even the patent office had no record, though Vey had publicly said he'd filed. The message was clear. You can't block it. You can't shield yourself. Whatever this signal is, it isn't just electromagnetic. It's something deeper, some thing that rides the pulse of your own body. The device didn't just fail. His skull split from the inside out. Once you start mapping the calls, you see it. Not in the random cases, the students, the truckers, the nameless victims, but in the powerful. Every time a major leader dies suddenly, someone somewhere whispers they got the call. Heart attacks in healthy men, plane crashes in perfect weather. The timing isn't coincidence, it's choreography. Analysts who've seen fragments of the black archives say the signal strikes when someone refuses to move off the chessboard. In the early 1980s, an oil executive was told the date of his death, weeks before he was set to expose a bribery network connecting Western banks to Middle Eastern royals. He didn't change his plans. He was dead within hours of the deadline. In 1999, a South American general preparing a coup went silent 2 days before the operation. The night before his forces were to move, his personal phone rang. When aides found him, he was sitting upright in uniform, eyes wide open, heart stopped. The coup collapsed without a shot fired. The pattern keeps repeating. Every event that shifts global wealth or power. Stock markets stabilize, wars end, governments quietly change direction, after someone on the inside suddenly dies. But here's the detail no one talks about. The calls cluster around transition points, new energy treaties, shifts in currency control, major technology patents. If you track them, they line up like dots on a map forming a giant clock, ticking towards something bigger. Someone, or something, isn't killing randomly. They're pruning, removing pieces that don't serve the next phase of the plan. The question isn't who's behind it. The question is why they warn you first. Why let a target know their own end? Is it intimidation? Indoctrination? A test of loyalty? If they obey, are they spared? Every analyst who digs deep enough comes to the same grim conclusion. The signal doesn't just announce death, it manages power, and those at the top know it. They just don't talk about it. Because talking about it makes your phone ring at night. Most people think the danger lies in picking up. They tell themselves, if I just let it ring, I'll be fine. But the records show something far more sinister. Refusing the call doesn't stop it. It reshapes it. One file describes a Tokyo businessman who received his first call at 12:17 a.m. He ignored it. 2 nights later it came again. Same number, same time. He muted his phone. A week later it rang again. But this time the sound wasn't coming from the device. It was coming from the walls of his apartment, vibrating through the plaster, static bleeding into every corner. He answered on instinct, even though there was no phone in his hand. 2 days later, his body was found sitting upright at his desk, eyes burned white. Another case in France. A woman threw her phone into the Seine after 3 consecutive calls. She thought she'd escaped. But the following night, her television turned on by itself, displaying nothing but her own number in dead white text. When she unplugged it, her landline rang. She picked it up. She didn't live to see morning. What investigators can't explain is how the signal follows you, even across continents. Change numbers, change devices. It doesn't matter. The call isn't coming to your phone. The phone is just the nearest door. Those who've studied it say the call is not a warning, but an invitation. You aren't forced to answer. You choose to. And that choice marks you. It's a test of how you face your own ending, whether you welcome it, deny it, or run from it. The signal adjusts accordingly. Some whisper about an old superstition, that if you let it ring 3 times and never pick up, the call changes tone. Not a voice anymore, just breathing. Like someone waiting outside your door, survivors claim they've heard it without any device around. The sound of static, mixed with a pulse, their own. So no, declining doesn't save you. It only decides whether death walks through the front door or climbs in through the window. If your phone rings at midnight tonight, will you answer? Every mystery leaves a paper trail, until someone burns the paper. And when it comes to the death call, every investigator who digs too deep eventually vanishes, not metaphorically, literally. Take the case of James Kettering, a retired FBI cybercrimes analyst. In 2006, he started privately collecting reports of untraceable phone calls tied to unusual deaths. He built a database, timestamps, recordings, carrier records. Friends say he had proof the calls didn't originate on any public network. One night, Kettering told his wife he was about to blow this open. He never made it to the press conference. His car was found on an empty service road, still running, door ajar. His laptop was gone. His phone was still ringing. Or Dr. Layla Armand, a Paris-based forensic linguist. She analyzed audio samples of the whispering voice. She swore it carried 2 layers, one human, one mechanical, like a voice trying to speak through static. Before she could publish, her apartment was ransacked. No forced entry, no valuables taken, just every note and drive erased. Her neighbors swear they heard a ringing sound all night, echoing through the pipes. Even journalists haven't been immune. In 2014, an Italian investigative podcaster recorded a full expose about the phenomenon, interviews with surviving relatives, leaked phone records, even a clip of the voice itself. The episode never aired. His entire RSS feed disappeared overnight. Days later, his body washed up near Naples. Official cause of death? Drowning. But friends said his lungs smelled of ozone. It's not just individuals. Entire investigative teams have been disbanded. In Eastern Europe, a small telecom watchdog group compiled months of metadata on anomalous calls. Before they went public, their office burned in a wiring accident. Witnesses claim they saw men removing boxes before the fire started. The message is unmistakable. Those who expose the call don't just get silenced, they get erased, not killed outright, removed from records as if they'd never existed. The signal doesn't just predict death. It predicts who might reveal it and cuts them off early. Ask yourself, if this much effort goes into hiding it, what's really at stake? And who has the power to make entire lives disappear without a trace? In the summer of 1993, a mining town in West Virginia fell silent, literally. It started small. One man claimed his phone rang every night at 1:11 a.m., then his neighbor, then half the street. Within a week, nearly everyone in town reported late-night calls from numbers they didn't recognize. People tried to ignore them, but curiosity is poison. Some picked up. Some swore they heard their own names spoken in voices that didn't belong to anyone alive. Others heard only static. Thick, wet static, like a broken radio drowned under water. Then the deaths began. A store owner collapsed at his register, no warning. A teacher never woke up. The local sheriff was found sitting upright in his cruiser, engine running, phone still in his lap, screen glowing even though the battery had been dead for days. The night it peaked, dozens of phones rang at once. The sound carried through the hills, a high, metallic chorus. Residents said it was like the air itself was humming. Then, silence. Not just the calls, the whole town. No dogs barking, no crickets, no wind through the trees. Even the birds vanished. By morning, 14 people were dead. Their bodies showed no wounds, no toxins, just wide-open eyes, as if they'd seen something they couldn't comprehend. Investigators came, but they left quickly. The official report blamed a contaminated water supply, but no contaminants were ever found. Locals who stayed say the silence never lifted. Radios stopped picking up stations. Payphones ate coins without dialing. Cell service never returned, even when towers were rebuilt years later. And the smell, people still talk about it, like burned wires and rain on hot asphalt. No one mentions the calls out loud anymore. But at night, in the few houses still standing, residents keep every phone unplugged. Not that it matters. Sometimes they say you can still hear the faint hum in the... And if an entire town can vanish from the network overnight, what else can be cut off without warning? What's powerful enough to make the living world itself go quiet? For years, everyone assumed the death call was just a hoax, a prank with a creepy voice modulator. That theory didn't survive its first real autopsy. Not on a body, on the voice itself. In 2011, a team of independent sound engineers in Berlin obtained a rare, clean recording. The call had been intercepted mid-ring and patched directly into a digital recorder. For 30 seconds, the voice whispered a name, a date, and a time. No distortion, no background noise, just raw signal. When they ran the waveform through analysis software, the first thing they found was wrong. It wasn't human speech at all. not in the traditional sense. The modulation pattern didn't match vocal cords. It matched something else, a biometric rhythm, a heartbeat. Layer 1 of the signal was organic, pulsing at exactly 72 beats per minute, the resting heart rate of the call's recipient. Layer 2 carried the actual words, but those weren't steady either. They spiked at irregular intervals, almost like Morse code, and buried even deeper, on frequencies no human ear should hear, was a third layer. A harmonic pattern identical to electrical interference, except it didn't match any known carrier signal. When they slowed the voice down, they heard something horrifying. It wasn't just speaking to the recipient, it was syncing with them. Every syllable aligned with their own cardiovascular rhythm, as if the voice wasn't coming through the phone, but from inside their body. The Berlin team tried to publish their findings. 2 members disappeared. The lab burned in an unexplained electrical fire. The hard drive survived long enough for one fragment to leak online. A spectral graph showing not one voice, but 2, fused together like overlapping shadows. Some experts privately admit what they fear. The whisper isn't an external warning. It's your own body reporting its shutdown schedule. Translate it by something, or someone, with access to the deepest frequencies of life itself. If the call knows your heart better than you do, who or what is really speaking? Every forbidden technology eventually finds a market, and if the death call is real, if someone can predict the exact moment of your last breath, you can be sure someone is willing to pay for it. Whispers of a black auction first surfaced in 2009, an encrypted marketplace, invitation only, where time schedules were sold to the highest bidder. Not just information about who would die and when, but the ability to move the date. No screenshots, no paper trail, just testimony from people who vanished after speaking out. One rumor tells of an oil magnate who bought 6 extra months of life after receiving the call. He paid not in cash, but in concessions. Land, drilling rights, political favors. When his time finally came, his empire collapsed overnight, as if every contract and handshake had been waiting for his heart to stop. Another speaks of a tech CEO whose competitors began dropping dead, one after another, after their numbers mysteriously appeared on this so-called ledger of expiration. No charges were ever filed, but insiders say his company's servers are packed with military-grade signal routing gear, equipment no civilian should own. Even governments aren't clean. Intelligence leaks hint that entire regimes have bartered with whoever controls the signal. Dissidents silenced without bullets. Enemies erased without evidence. A perfect weapon. No fingerprints. No gunpowder. Just a ringing phone at midnight. No one knows who brokers these deals. Some say it's ex-intelligence agents. Others whisper about a private cabal inside major telecom companies. But one thing is certain. The calls don't come cheap. Life extension is the rarest currency, and the cost isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in obedience. If you're powerful enough to buy time, you're powerful enough to make others run out of it. And if you think you're safe because you're not impotent enough to be a target, remember this: information trickles down. What starts as a weapon for kings eventually becomes a toy for thieves. So ask yourself, if someone offered to sell you your death date, or push it back, what would you pay? Most calls from beyond the veil come from nowhere. No carrier, no tower handshake. Investigators who've tried to trace them hit the same wall every time. The number doesn't exist in any database, not even blacklisted ones. But the deeper horror isn't an unknown number. It's a known one. In dozens of verified cases, the call displayed something disturbingly familiar: the recipient's own phone number, as if they were calling themselves from a line that shouldn't exist. And then came the cases that broke every rule. People started reporting numbers they'd never seen before. But later, when they upgraded their phones or switched plans, that exact number became theirs. In other words, the call was coming from their future self. Telecom engineers went pale reviewing the logs. These weren't spoofed caller IDs. The routing actually showed the call originating from legitimate switching centers, but dated ahead of time, as though someone or something had already written your number into history before it was ever assigned. One woman in Nevada got a call in 2018 from a number she didn't recognize. The whisper gave her a date, June the 4th, 2021. 3 years later, she walked into a Verizon store to replace her broken phone. They handed her a new SIM. The number printed on the receipt was the same one she'd seen flashing on her screen years earlier. She died in a single-car accident that night, at 11:59 p.m. You can spoof a caller ID, you can't spoof time, unless you're not spoofing at all. Unless the system isn't bending, it's following a schedule that was already set. What kind of network can reach forward into your life and pull out information you don't even have yet? What kind of power looks at the flow of time like a contact list? If your phone rang tonight and the screen showed the number you'll be assigned 2 years from now, would you answer? If there's one thing engineers can't resist, it's a system no one understands. After the first confirmed recordings of death calls leaked online, a small group of signal specialists formed a private project. Their goal wasn't to stop the calls, it was to map them, to see if there was a pattern, a grid, a master key. They started with scattered cases, victims across different states, different carriers, different lifestyles. But when they plotted the calls on a timeline, something impossible emerged. Each event wasn't random. It lined up like constellations, precise, deliberate, connected by invisible lines only mathematics could reveal. The deeper they went, the stranger it got. One engineer noticed that every new call occurred at a location equidistant from the last two. Another saw that the timestamps formed a rhythm, like a ticking clock with uneven hands. They weren't chasing a signal anymore. They were inside a countdown. They built a device, not to block the calls, but to listen to them all at once. A bank of antennas, wide-spectrum receivers, and decoding rigs capable of pulling whispers out of thin air. They called it the chorus. The chorus didn't just receive calls, it predicted them. For 2 nights they watched the grid light up in advance, calls pinging in places that hadn't happened yet, names appearing hours before the phone rang. But on the 3rd night, the system went silent. No static, no hum, just dead air. Then, without warning, every phone in the lab rang at once, different tones, different carriers, synchronized like a funeral bell. Neighbors reported a blinding flash through the windows. Police found the building empty, equipment melted like plastic left in a furnace. No bodies, no trace. Just one monitor still running, its screen cracked from heat. On it, a single line of text. You're inside the network now. Some say the engineers at ours didn't die. They were absorbed, their consciousness scattered across the signal they tried to chart. Others say they succeeded, that they became part of the chorus itself, calling out to warn or recruit those who listened too closely. When the system calls, you don't map it. It maps you. For years, whenever a death call case went public, phone companies issued the same statement. We have no evidence of network involvement. Simple, cold, hollow. But deep inside those corporations, different conversations were happening. Leaked memos from carrier executives mention unusual routing events, phantom call records, and urgent compliance directives. These weren't prank calls. They were systemic anomalies, signals moving through infrastructure that no technician had ever installed. One engineer at a major telecom provider confessed off-record that certain flagged numbers were quarantined, not for spam, but because they weren't supposed to exist. These numbers traveled on ghost channels, bypassing towers entirely, yet still appearing in customer logs as if they were real. Why would companies stay silent? Because the calls didn't just expose a glitch. They exposed access. Somewhere, someone was riding the backbone of global communication. Someone who could route any call through any device, no matter who owned it. If that power became public knowledge, no government, no boardroom, no intelligence agency could contain the chaos. The manufacturers aren't clean either. Internal security briefings at two major smartphone brands, both household names, warned engineers not to chase phantom frequency spikes. Phones were tested in shielded chambers, yet still rang with calls no antenna should have received. Hardware leads begged to redesign the baseband chips. Their bosses told them to bury it. Because if the problem isn't hardware or software, then it's something deeper, something built into the global telecom skeleton itself. Undersea cables, switching centers, satellites, all compromised long before we were born. And here's the worst part. The silence isn't just fear, it's cooperation. Several whistleblowers claim their companies were ordered to provide priority routing for unidentified calls. Not block them, not trace them, just clear the line. If that's true, then the death call isn't a ghost in the machine. It's a guest of honor, invited, protected. When your phone rings at midnight, your carrier won't save you. Your manufacturer won't save you. They'll make sure the signal reaches you, crisp and clear, like a voice whispering through a broken radio underwater. What if every death call wasn't just a warning, but a tick on a clock? Not your clock. The clock. A pattern researchers call the final countdown theory. It began with a data analyst who mapped hundreds of call reports on a world timeline. The pattern was too precise to ignore. The timestamps weren't random. They aligned like gears, rotating, advancing, counting down to something far bigger than individual deaths. Every call wasn't an isolated event. It was a number in a sequence, and when the analyst overlaid that sequence on global population data, she froze. If the rhythm held, the pace of calls would accelerate until they all converged on a single point. Midnight. Not local midnight, global midnight. A theoretical moment when every time zone would line up in a digital heartbeat, like one synchronized breath. Think about that. These calls aren't selecting victims at random. They're building pressure, step by step, click by click. And the clock is almost full. Signals experts who've seen the charts say it's like watching an eclipse move across human history. Predictable, mathematical, inevitable. The question isn't who will get the next call. It's what happens when everyone does. Governments know. Quietly, certain agencies have run simulations of mass midnight events. They've tested emergency systems, backup grids, even underground shelters. But you can't hide from a phone call, not when the network itself becomes the messenger. Some theorists say midnight marks a purge, a planned thinning of the herd, executed with surgical precision. Others believe it's a transformation, a forced awakening, where only those who answer correctly survive. A few think it's neither, that the call itself is alive, and midnight is when it finally stops whispering, because it no longer has to. Look at the pace of reports. Look at how often you've seen stories of phantom CE. All's in just the last year. Do you feel it speeding up? That's not paranoia. That's the second hand moving. If your phone rang right now, would you answer? Or would you let it ring, knowing that midnight is coming whether you pick up or not? For years, survivors described the same thing. A whisper on the line. A grainy murmur, like a broken radio underwater. But when forensic audio labs finally got their hands on clear recordings, the truth shattered every theory. The waveform wasn't speech. Not really. Human voices have certain patterns. Vowels, consonants, breathing. This was different. It pulsed, irregular, like a heartbeat converted into sound. When run through a phonetic analyzer, the signal didn't form words at all. It formed names. But here's the terrifying part. The names weren't spoken in any single language. They were layered. Dozens of voices at once, speaking in unison, across frequencies only machines could fully detect. Some were young, some were old, some weren't human at all. Technicians slowed the signal down to a crawl, trying to isolate just one thread of sound. What they heard made even hardened intelligence officers walk out of the room. A voice that was both male and female, both child and elder. Something ancient, something cold. It didn't say your name. It remembered it, as if it had always known you. One lab director, before disappearing without explanation, left behind a note scrawled in red ink. It's not calling you. It's calling itself, through you. What does that mean? If the voice isn't human, is it artificial? A machine older than our machines? Or is it something alive, something that uses our networks like veins, carrying its signal the way blood carries oxygen? Another chilling discovery. When the signal was mapped on a spectrogram, the patterns formed shapes. Jagged circular symbols resembling ones found in Egyptian death scrolls, Norse carvings, and Aztec omen codices. Not random noise. Instructions. The calls aren't just warnings, they're rituals. And the voice isn't a messenger, it's a key, turning inside your skull, unlocking something you didn't even know was there. If you've ever picked up a call at night and thought you heard faint static even after hanging up, maybe you didn't disconnect. Maybe the voice is still listening. Before a man gets the call, things start to shift, but not in ways you'd expect. There's no ominous music, no thunder in the distance. It's quieter than that. Too quiet. Survivors, or rather those who almost received the call, describe it like standing in a room where the air is suddenly too heavy to breathe. Electronics flicker, screens freeze, not from power loss but from something else. As if time itself is hesitating. Pets act strange. Dogs stare at blank walls. Cats hiss at corners of empty rooms. But the most common sign? Static. Not on your phone. Everywhere. On TV channels that still broadcast analog. On car radios even when turned off. In your ears when you're alone, like a distant ticking clock you can't find. And then comes the number. Always one digit off from yours. Always calling someone you don't know. And yet, somehow, it feels meant for you. Investigators found that people who were about to receive the call often started dreaming in perfect detail. Dreams of corridors with no doors, endless ringing phones on tables of glass, voices reciting dates they couldn't forget. One man swore that the night before his call, he saw his own phone glowing in the dark, screen off, battery removed, but humming like it was alive. They say when the moment finally comes, you feel it before you hear it. The air grows still. Your own heartbeat sounds wrong, like it's syncing with something outside you. And when your phone rings, there's no doubt who it's for. That's why they call it the last gate. It's not about the call itself. It's about what it unlocks in you before it even arrives. A readiness, or maybe a surrender. As if the voice on the line doesn't need to convince you. It just needs you to answer. Will you? Or will you let it ring, knowing that if it truly wants you, it doesn't need your permission? You've followed the trail this far. You've seen the patterns, the deaths, the signals buried in static like whispers underwater. You know now. These calls aren't random. They're not warnings. They're invitations. And midnight is close. Some men spend their whole lives chasing secrets like these, thinking knowledge will protect them. But this isn't knowledge. It's a countdown. Every report, every testimony, every unexplained ring. It all points to one truth. The voice on the line isn't a stranger. It isn't even an enemy. It's you, waiting on the other end of time. Think about it. Why does it know your name before you say hello? Why does it breathe instead of speak? Why does the static feel alive? Because it's not telling you when you'll die. It's telling you when you'll arrive. The final pattern shows that the last sequence of calls isn't spread over years. It happens in one night. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of phones ringing at once. No power surge, no signal spike. Just a wave moving through the network like blood through veins. When it's over, the line goes dead. But so do you. The scariest part? Some researchers believe the call doesn't even need a phone anymore. The sound, that grainy, drowning tick of an ancient heartbeat, can come through anything. A radio, a speaker, the silence between your own breaths, and once you've heard it, you never stop hearing it. You think this is just a story, but somewhere out there, a signal is already moving. It doesn't care if you believe. It doesn't care if you're ready. It only cares that you pick up. So if your phone rings tonight, in the dark, and the number flashing on the screen looks just a little too familiar, will you let it ring? Or will you answer, knowing the voice on the line isn't warning you, it's welcoming you home? The next ring isn't in this story, it's in your room.